welcome to the BrandHook webinar, Consumers Buy on Autopilot, What Does That Mean for Your Brand? If you've got any questions, please tweet us at #BrandHook, and we've got a team of people ready to answer questions. Today we're going to go through consumers and their rituals and habits, looking at consumer behaviour. There are four main takeouts I want you to take away today. Our behaviour is ritualistic. Your consumers buy habitually. Those in a habit will spend more with that brand. And consumer immersions delivers insight for disruption. And this is a really important part of the process where you get to spend time with your punters in their world, understanding the cues and drivers and the rewards that make them tick. So last year, BrandHook spent a year in observation. We spent time with those drinking tea, dieting, grocery shopping, wine buying, and so on. And spending time with our tribes meant that we could see their autopilot behaviour and their conscious mind switch on and off. We validated all of these insights with a nationally representative quantitative study, of which I'm going to show you some of the facts. So the first big key thought really is that we're driven by repetition. Our daily lives are driven by doing the same thing time and time again. And it's important that we're repetitious. Imagine having to rethink everything all day. Life would be just too difficult. In fact, 46% of what we do every day is driven by rituals and routines. So almost half of what we do is the same. And this is proved and supported by empirical research that says that people buy the same brands, they purchase the same things at the same retail stores, and we eat the same foods. And I think you'll notice in your own world that you probably have 6 to 8 meals that you will eat on a fortnightly basis. We are creatures of habit. So why do we have such strong daily patterns? 75% of people in our study agreed that routines exist to make life run as smoothly as possible. It's interesting because when we cut that data down by segments and we looked at, say, mothers, 80% of mothers told us that they have routines to make their lives run smoothly. And in fact, it's quite different from what the press says about how mothers behave. And if you read about mothers' lives, you often see these chaotic pictures. Megan Francis, who's written a book called The Happiest Mum, and she says that a mother's daily rituals and routines are created for the ebbs and flow of daily life. And when we asked our mothers how they felt, actually 68% of mothers felt that their life was in control. And again, in our study, 65% of mothers agreed that once they find a product, they stick to it. So they are in control and they're finding products that they like. And it is very interesting because 85% of all purchasing decisions are made by women. So it is important that we take account of this. We also can cut the data by rituals, and we look at our mothers' rituals. The most ritualistic part of their day are mornings, then what TV programs they watch, how they construct meal times, work, finances, and supermarket shopping is quite high. Then we can look at radio, cooking, cleaning, tidying, driving, and the internet. So a whole range of ritualistic behaviour. So that's the first thing. Repetition is a very important part of our lives. The next big thought is that when we are repetitious, we're operating in an autopilot state. When we're habitual, we're operating in the unconscious mind. There is a part of the brain called the basal ganglia where all of our habit information sits, and the job of that part of our brain is to chunk information down, so that we can actually get on and get moving into life. The interesting thing is that when we're in autopilot's mindset, we're actually operating in the unconscious, and it means we're not aware of alternatives. We're actually not aware. We're really just behaving. There's a survival expert called Bob Cooper, and he's an Australian guy who works out of WA. and he sells a survival kit online, which you can buy if you're going trekking in the desert. And he said in this survival kit there's a tea bag, which seems a bit odd, but it's really interesting because he said when you're lost and you're starting to panic, you're operating in a very conscious, irrational state. And he wants you to do something that is an autopilot behavior so that you can calm down, do something in the unconscious, and then kind of make a plan to get out of the trouble you're in. There's a great book that's written by a guy called Charles Duhigg, and he's an American journalist. And once we did all our work, we actually ferreted around in the empirical studies and found this piece of this book, which summarized all of the work that some of the scientists have put together. And it's a very interesting beginning of the journey, really. But he does a great job of summarizing what we call the habit loop. So the habit loop is really how we form habits and routines. You always start with the top one, which is the cue. So the cue is the trigger or the thing that actually gets you going on the habit. Then you have the routine, which is the behavior of the habit, and then you get the reward, so the benefit of actually engaging in that behavior. So if you think about starting to get your running habit going, you would put your trainers at the end of the bed, the alarm goes off at 5, and you slip into your trainers and you run out the door. You run, which is the behavior or the routine, and the reward is that you feel brilliant afterwards. The craving is a bit that we've added to this whole process. Charles Duhigg does talk a little bit about it, but we've started to do create some science around this part of the process. When you start craving that reward, that's when things become habitual. And for brands, we often reward is where the emotion sits. So when we talk about a brand needing to connect emotionally with their consumers, the craving is the bit we're talking about. The next bit is, and this again is very important for brands, how do you disrupt another's behavior? How do you disrupt another's habit with a product that could be a key competitor? Well, the key here is actually hitting them at the cue stage. So if this is the bit that starts the habit, this is where you need to awaken them out of their unconscious behavior and get them thinking of an alternative. And it doesn't just happen by putting an ad on telly. It has to be linked directly with some kind of behavior. And I'll go on and give you some examples. An important takeout, though, is that not only do we form habits to help us save time, make our lives easier, we actually also think these habits and routines are better alternative. So that means that we're in an unconscious state for almost half of what we do, and we think that that's better. So it's really crucial that marketers understand the process to strengthening or disrupting habits, because there is a science attached to it. I'll just give you some examples. There's a great example by Tontine. I don't know if you remember or not, but in 2010, Tontine launched their products with an out-of-date stamp. People had habits of hanging on to their pillows for a long time, possibly 10 or 12 years, and they did a great campaign where they communicated all the animals running around in people's heads. And it was fantastic. It actually grew the business 20% year on year since the launch of the stamp. So now there's a new cue and trigger to encourage people to repurchase after 2 years. Another example is a product that I actually worked on when I lived in London called Febreze. Not many men know this product, although they should, but it is a fabulous product to get rid of, dirty smelling sports clothes and kids' activities. What was really interesting about this product was that it actually launched with a reward. So they tried to create the craving and the habit around cleaning odours away. But they launched it with the target of smokers and pet owners. And unfortunately, there was no repetition, no repeat purchase, because pet owners and cigarette smokers cannot smell their own smells. So they had to dig deeper back into the immersions that they conducted and found there was a whole other group of women that were using this product to kind of get the craving of the satisfaction of a clean room. So they added more smell and they changed the proposition and got the craving and reward right. And they've obviously created a great habit because it's the #1 selling product at Procter & Gamble. This is a film I'm going to show you. It's about car purchasing. It might be a bit jumpy, but I'm going to play it and then I'll talk to you about it afterwards. It's interesting because when we look at longer term purchases, habit plays a really strong role as well. And there is data that says that when you're looking to buy a car, you only actually look around at 1.5 other cars that you already own or the brand you already own. So I'll play this film and then I'll discuss it.
Achando do carro. Como disse, eu não tô achando, eu tô me achando excelente. Nem parece que tá dirigindo. Tá suave, né? Ele vai chegando a velocidade assim de uma maneira educada. Tirar um carro desse, todo mundo para pra olhar, né? Ser resgatado num momento de sofrimento é muito legal.
It's a great job of a car company looking at doing things a bit differently and actually trying to communicate to people when they are thinking about changing their cars and awakening them out of their autopilot behaviour. The next example is another FMCG example, Rafferty's Gardens. Those of you that have got small kids would know this product. Heinz's market share over the last 3 years, taking 30%. It launched with an interesting new packaging, which is a great disruptor. Heinz actually owned this packaging as well, but they'd hidden it away at the bottom of the shelf with some fruit product. And Rafferty's Garden brought it out to the middle of the shelf. And they also communicated an organic feel about the product. And look, they changed the look of the design that was traditionally already in that space. And as I said, they really disrupted that mother's habit of buying a jar of food and giving it to their children in a kind of embarrassed, hidden away moment, to really bringing this out where the mums were buying this for their kids to eat in cafes, but what we've also found is that the mums actually use it as a backup in their own cupboard. And the last example before I move on is Apple. Apple's a really habitual brand. I've got some numbers for you on iPad that we've looked at in the last couple of months, because Apple have actually disrupted their own habit. They launched the iPhone 5 with the new cord, and instead of all of us lining up as we had for years just to get our new phone because they'd used cues and triggers on technology and design to tell us that there was a new one available, we actually stopped to think about whether we wanted it. And having been awoken out of that habitual behaviour, Apple's iPhone market share has gone down and Samsung's market share, particularly in the UK and Asia, has gone up. And I don't know or not if you've seen the I changed ads that Samsung. What's really interesting is Apple's realised that they've done that, they've lost market share, and they're now communicating, they're going back to the craving message that they started with 3 or 4 years ago about why we should buy Apple. So they're going back to trying to create that habit again. So repetition is important, autopilot behaviour is important, and the last thing I want to talk about is life stages is a really great way to change people's habits, or understanding how people move through these life stages. There was a professor, Alan Anderson, at UCLA in the 1980s that did a study on the more mundane purchases like soaps, toothpaste, toilet paper. And he found that mostly shoppers paid absolutely no attention to buying these products, and they actually bought them habitually. But what he also found, which was really interesting, was that when people look to change these kind of products, it's when they go into a different life stage. So when people were getting divorced, when people were getting married, or people having children, they started to look at different life stages. They looked at different ways, purchases and products to buy. It's interesting because it's not just the products that we buy in the mundane market, but it's also longer term products. And this is the map of the American voting of 2008 and 2012. And you can see here how ingrained our habits can be. There's only one its preferences in the 4 years of voting. And as I said, the iPad is another great example of longer term purchases that are also very habitual. In the last section of this presentation, I'll show you the numbers, but the data showed that 87% of people in a habit with an iPad are more likely to purchase that brand without considering alternatives. So people are buying iPads yearly, maybe once every 18 months. And in that length of time, they would not consider an alternative. And it's quite amazing because, a lot of people think about habit and repetition as being an FMCG space, but what we're finding is it's also applicable to longer term purchases. So looking at people's life stages, we've got young people. Young people are very habitual during the week, but not so habitual on the weekends. They actually told us that they actively throw out their habits. Mums, as we talked about, are very habitual. Older people, when their kids leave home, they told us that they start to create new kinds of habits. They create Monday night dinners to bring the family together, or they'll create a Sunday activity for the family to spend time. And men are the least habitual creatures we have. Very habitual about work, though, and interestingly, an increasingly habitual behaviour with beauty products. Maybe not in the BrandHook office, though. A really good example of a company that's using life stages to market is the Target in the US. Some of you may know this story, but they use big data to understand consumers' shopping habits or shopping patterns. And they identified a way that they could find pregnant women purely by the purchases that they were making. So they decided to send out coupons to these women to encourage them to buy nappies or wipes or so on. A girl went storming into a local Target in the US and complained that his daughter had been given coupons for nappies, until he went home and she told him that she was actually pregnant. So it's a terrible story for him, but a good story for Target in that they're actually onto something. And they are using this kind of life stage approach very successfully. And we've seen it in retail quite a bit. The other thing that's really interesting is habits when you look at different channels. We're doing a big piece of innovation work with one of the big 4 banks looking at the younger audience. And what we found that's really interesting is how habitual these customers are with the channels they use. So the younger audience are constantly checking their phones online for their bank account details or just checking their balances. But when they had very serious concerns, they didn't want to go into a branch, but they did want to ring. They needed a voice at the end of the phone. So we're trying to work out ways in which we can change some of those habits within those channels. So we've talked about repetition, pilot, and we've talked about life stage being crucial to habits. And I just want to end on the model that we've created that can add some science to all this kind of stuff we've talked about. Repetition is key for brand success. We know that repeated behaviours relating to purchases and consumption are directly linked to increases in market share. If anyone's read Byron Sharp's book, How Brands Grow, he talks a lot about acquisition being key to market market share growth, but also repeated behaviours. You need people to buy your product often or regularly. We believe the old model of marketing is redundant, known as the ADA model, which I actually learnt 100 years ago at Monash when I studied my marketing arts degree. Studying it again, she's just finished after 4.5 years. We just believe doesn't work anymore, because the first premise of attention, where you grab people's attention, well, that doesn't work if people are in habit. So we've created a new model which we call the journey to brand craving. And you've seen some of this, but you start with the cue, then you have the routine, you get a reward, you create the craving, you get habit, then you get autopilot behaviour. But we've modelled that up so that our clients can actually understand how this works for them. So there are two axes. One is consciousness and the other is brand affinity. Consciousness is where you have little consciousness at the top and a lot of high consciousness at the bottom. And then brand affinity goes from weak to strong. If you map that out, you have in the bottom right, left-hand corner those that are actively making choices. So those people within this category that are often looking for deals or alternatives. It gets interesting when you start to look at the other two segments, the blue people. Those that have a commitment to others, where there is little consciousness but weak affinity to your brand, but those that are alert to you, so they have some strong relationship with you, but not yet in a habit. And then obviously there's the green box, which is Mecca. And our work has helped us understand that if you get those people into those green box, you'll get them to spend more with your brand, you get them to buy more from your brand, they have fewer other brands in their repertoire that they will mix around, and they actually feel more attached to your brand. So 4 very compelling reasons about why we should all be moving people into habit. When you want to move those from the alert box to your habitual box, you need to look at strengthening that reward and that craving, which we talked about earlier. And when you want to get others or your key competitors people, you need to be looking at disruption. We do a lot of work with a discount department store. And one of the things we found was that they had 16% of their customer base in habit, and they were spending 26% more than those customers that were in the bottom alert box. We also found out that they had less brands in their repertoire. So the green box is habit and the red box is those that are constantly searching. And you can see that there's less brands in the repertoire of a habit box than there is in a searching box. This is the iPad example, which we talked about earlier. 34% of those in a habit, in an iPad habit, are likely to purchase a new tablet in the next 12 months versus 23% of those who weren't. So that's the point about you'll get more purchases more often. And this is a longer term purchase. So imagine what this kind of figure would be like for an FMCG. The other important point here is you can see the difference between Apple and Samsung. Apple customers have 35% Apple habit and Samsung is 11%. We're going to do this again in about 6 months to see if there's any shift, because we're seeing the shift in the phones. The last example is the grocery example, which is an example we published earlier this year. When you look at the grocery market, there are 60% of people who are out of a habit, but 40% of people in the whole category are in habit. When you break that down, and let's take Coles as an example, you can see that 16% of Coles customers are in a habit. But we believe the big opportunity here for Coles is those 26% of people who are only alert to Coles. So you have Coles in their repertoire and have some kind of relationship with Coles, but are not yet in an autopilot behaviour. That's 16% of Coles' habitual customers, is 38% of their whole customer base. But when we cut that down with Aldi and Woolies, you could see that Aldi had only a 4% habitual customer base, but that was actually nearly half of their whole customer base. And as Aldi grows and increases their penetration, it'll be a watch out for Coles because they're habitual customers. They've got more habitual or as a ratio than Coles does. So to investigate that further, we then conducted immersive sessions, which we believe is really key, as we've talked about. There's a great book called Ethnography for Marketers by Hui Miriam-Polinsky. He's an American researcher, and what's amazing about what he does is he writes about the how moving from, say, traditional focus groups to ethnography or immersive techniques is like moving from black and white to colour. And he said the context and the detail that you get from immersions offers you so much more richness than having people around a table talking. And we've been following this in our own careers for about 20 years. It's a real BrandHook philosophy. And we've rummaged through fridges and we've rummaged a lot in wardrobes. And we really believe it's the only way to understand how we can break people's habits. I actually had a film in here to show you, but it's just a bit tricky to play. So we're going to send it to people afterwards. But once we did that immersive technique, looking at this grocery market, we did believe, and we still believe, that Coles' opportunities to strengthen the habit. When we looked at the reward, so remember we talked a lot about reward and craving as a way to form habits. When we looked at what the current reward is for Coles shoppers, they talk a lot about convenience. So you can see here we've broken the reward into 4 categories. There's convenience, quality, savings, and emotional. And Coles does very well on convenience. That's what people like about Coles. It's convenient. When you break that down to Woolies, you can see that, yes, convenience is high, but it's equal second with their perception of quality. And you can also see here that the emotional aspect of Woolies is much higher. So what our recommendation to Coles would be that they start to look really strongly at how they can create more craving and get a stronger reward with their customers so that convenience is not as high. Because it's hard to own convenience, but it's much easier to own a space on quality and emotion. I just wanted to finish off on a quote from David Neal, who's a psychologist specialising in consumer habits in the States. He's actually working at Microsoft to break a Google habit. But he says that this study is a powerful reminder that consumers are much less consciously engaged in many product purchase decisions than we typically assume. And when brands and marketers ignore the role of ritual, they often miss the boat in terms of influencing actual behaviour. We're really only kind of tipping the iceberg with this presentation. We've got a lot more stuff we can talk about and a lot more work we're doing with our current customers or our own clients. But really, we just wanted to finish off by saying for you to think about a few things. How habitual is your category or your channels that you're using and your customers? Where is your money best spent? Is it on strengthening or disrupting or a combination of the both? And what are the triggers and cues and rewards that you'll need to drive that habit? Thank you very much for your time. As I said, we're running our hashtag BrandHook if you've got any Twitter questions, or you can email us in the next half an hour. We'll still be here. Alternatively, Selma and I plan to give everyone a call just to follow up and see how you responded to the presentation and what more we can do to discuss. So thank you very much.